All right, so today I want to talk about this tweet and story from Patrick Moore. Now, basically, he goes on to say the climate is cooling. If northern hemisphere snow mass is any indication, the this it certainly proves that most climate scientists' predictions were 180 degrees wrong. Now, the reason why I want to make a video about this is I think it's pretty obvious that I always cite the idea that climate change is largely a non-issue. In fact, I would say a complete non-issue, and I like to make videos about this kind of stuff because when stories like this come out, it kind of backs up my hypothesis when it comes to this kind of stuff. So basically, they go on to say that the 2018 holds the record for the snowiest uh, winter ever. Basically, let's actually just go into here and read a little bit more about it. To be honest, um, I actually haven't read the article. I was just going through his Twitter feed and I seen this, and I thought I'd make a video about it. So they go on to say, in 2013, The Guardian ran with the story that the Arctic would be ice free by 2015 due to a catastrophic methane induced warming pulse and lack of snowfall and ice. 10 years ago, the same rag claimed that Greenland was going to collapse within 10 years, and yet, according to NASA, the largest glacier, the Jacob Shoven, has grown for the past 3 years. In January 2020, it set an all time low temperature. In 2008, the AP ran a headline saying we're toast and reported that NASA scientists claim the Arctic will be ice free by 2018 due to rapid snowfall. And yeah, basically, we're just going on to read more about that kind of stuff. Um, where's that other part here? The Institute also points out that the 2017-18 winter was more exceptional, and the following winter, 2018-19, was greater still, with only 1989, 93, 97, 2001 recording higher masses at their seasonal peaks. So if I'm reading the data right, as far as peak snow mass is concerned, 2018-19 was the fifth snowiest northern hemisphere season in the past 41 years, with 2017-18 being the sixth and 2019-20 being the seventh. So again, I'm not going to read the whole article. You can go on and read more of it if you want. But again, this goes to show that this whole idea of climate change being a big issue is just not true. Like the data doesn't point to it. I don't care if you're 97% of scientists agree. Again, all that kind of data is cherry picked, and not only that, if it isn't cherry picked, climate scientists are basically paid off the idea that climate change is this big, huge issue that we need to deal with. If climate change wasn't a big issue, then the overwhelming majority of climate change scientists would be out of a job. So again, the left always likes to, whenever they bring this kind of stuff up, they always claim that, anyone who's a skeptic, oh, you're paid off by someone, even though it's the exact opposite, which again fits with my hypothesis that most of the left's accusations are just them projecting, like hating the poor. I don't think they hate the poor, but their policies hurt the poor clearly and objectively. So I think that's just them projecting when it comes to that kind of stuff. Um, Pretty much every one of their positions, I believe, is them projecting. But this is just another example of that. That if climate change was this big issue, then again, where's the evidence for it? Where's the evidence? And the problem is that when you talk to the average person about it, they've been fed all this propaganda that they laugh at you, but yet they've never actually looked into things for themselves. They can't cite anything off the top of their head. Like I look at this tweet right here. It's well known that the climate is warming. This is the modern warm period, like medieval warm period and the Roman warm period, which is warmer than today. The Eemian interglacial 130,000 years ago was 2 degrees Celsius warmer than today at 280 parts per million CO2. Also, sea level 400,000 years ago, about 20 meters higher and 280 parts per million. Again, another thing that's completely wrong is that the left correlates the levels of CO2 with temperature and with sea level and all this kind of stuff. When you look back at history, that's not true. The levels of CO2 doesn't correlate with temperature. You look at the medieval warm period, CO2 levels weren't massive, but there was other times in history where CO2 was very high. So I would say it correlates a little bit, but not hand in hand, like the climate alarmists would have you believe, which is just another reason why the idea of a carbon tax doesn't make any sense, like whatsoever. Well, like I say, we know it doesn't work. Like I say, the BC government's tried it. Their own numbers show that it's only reduced CO2 levels by 0.5%. Like that's nothing. You're going to literally spend billions of dollars, trillions even, if you look at the states, to affect CO2 levels by zero point 0.5, maybe 1-2% at the most. Like, are you joking? Like, are you seriously? That's what these people are arguing for. That it's worth spending billions, in the states examples, trillions of dollars to affect CO2 levels by 1 or 2%? Like, seriously? Like, are you joking? And this just goes to show that these people have absolutely nothing. Like, they know absolutely nothing whatsoever. Because if you actually believed in what you believed in, you wouldn't be arguing for a carbon tax. Like, it's something that I can't stand about these people that argue for that. They don't seem to understand that we can disagree on the idea of a carbon tax and still agree that climate change is a big issue. Like, you don't have to agree 100%. Like, I've explained this before, but it just makes zero sense. I wanted to make a video about this because, like I say, I always cite the idea that climate change is a complete non-issue, and there's no data to back it up. In fact, there's data to back up the exact opposite position. And like I say, here it is. Here's more evidence, more evidence. And for the problem with, like I say, with climate change is it doesn't make sense from a logical perspective, because if they actually believed in that, they would be arguing against governments running deficits. But since they don't care about the government running deficits, then claiming that climate change is this big issue and that the reason we have to do this kind of stuff is because down the road, the earth will be unlivable. But if we're running massive deficits year after year after year, inflation will catch up with us at some point anyway. So it makes zero sense that from a logical perspective, there's an obvious contradiction there. The data doesn't back it up. There's plenty of money to be made off this. That's something that the left seems to, like I say, refuse to acknowledge, that a lot of these climate scientists, they got pretty cushy salaries, and all they have to do is just repeat and regurgitate the same information to make their cushy salaries. And another reason why I think that the Trudeau government, for example, likes the idea of a carbon tax is that they like to run massive deficits, and everybody knows that at some point it's going to come back and haunt you, that you can't keep doing it over and over again. So if they can convince people to go for a carbon tax, then that's just more money that they can have available to offset their massive amounts of spending. So I think that's one of the reasons why they support a carbon tax, which obviously, again, they're not going to tell you all the real reasons they support it. They're not going to tell you about. But anyway, I wanted to make a video about this because this stuff is very important. And like I say, I always cite the idea that climate change is a non-issue, and I always like to provide evidence of things when I make claims within videos. And you don't really sometimes don't have time to sit there for 10-15 minutes explaining evidence on top of this kind of stuff. So when I make these kind of claims, this is a good video to remember or to come back to point that kind of stuff out. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. If you like the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. I do have my PayPal link in the description. I do have an email address for e-transfer. I appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already.